A white billionaire's perfect life unravels when his black triplet sons, long thought dead, confront him at a glitzy car gala. Lies, betrayal, and a deadly plot twist await. Can truth rebuild a fractured family? A poison plot exposed and an empire reborn. Where are you listening from today? Drop a comment and share your guess. Will justice prevail? Subscribe now for our latest gripping stories and join the journey. Hit that bell, comment below, and stay tuned. Secrets this big don't stay buried for long. The Atlanta Luxury Auto Expo glittered under a canopy of crystal chandeliers, the air thick with jazz and the clink of champagne flutes. Leonard Harrington, 55, stood at the heart of it all, his silver hair catching the light, his tailored tuxedo a testament to his billionaire status. As CEO of Harrington Enterprises, he was Atlanta's untouchable titan, charming, poised, and revered. Beside him, Victoria, his wife of 24 years, radiated elegance in a sapphire gown, her diamond earrings sparkling with every calculated smile. Their daughters, Eleanor and Beatrice, were absent, studying at Yale and Princeton, but Leonard's world felt complete, or so he thought. He scanned the showroom, where Atlanta's elite mingled among sleek Ferraris and Maseratis, their voices a hum of wealth and ambition. A waiter offered him another flute, but Leonard's hand froze mid-reach. Across the room, near a polished black Bentley, stood three men, identical, commanding, their presence like a thunderclap in the refined chaos. They were tall, their skin a rich brown, their bespoke suits hugging athletic frames. But it was their eyes that stopped Leonard's heart, piercing green, like emeralds catching fire. His eyes. "Leonard, you're pale," Victoria whispered, her manicured hand grazing his arm. "What's wrong? Too much champagne?" He couldn't answer. The tallest of the three turned, his gaze locking onto Leonard's with a precision that felt like a blade. A smile curved his lips, not warm, but knowing. Leonard's pulse roared in his ears, drowning out the jazz. 27 years ago, he'd buried a secret so deep he'd convinced himself it was dead. His triplet sons, born to Aisha Thompson, a black law student he'd loved fiercely at Emory University. His parents, old money aristocrats, had deemed her a scandal, her pregnancy a stain. They'd forced Leonard to sign adoption papers, swearing the boys had died at birth. He'd believed them, or chosen to. Three ghosts, he thought, the words unbidden as the second brother glanced his way, adjusting his cufflinks with a gesture that echoed Aisha's quiet confidence. The third, with a charismatic tilt to his head, whispered something to his brothers, and all three sets of green eyes fixed on Leonard, unyielding, accusing. The champagne flute trembled in his hand, threatening to shatter. "Leonard, you're worrying me," Victoria said, her voice sharper now, her blue eyes narrowing. "Do you know those men?" He opened his mouth, but no sound came. The tallest brother stepped forward, weaving through the crowd with the grace of a panther. "Mr. Harrington," he said, voice smooth as velvet but laced with steel. "A moment of your time?" His brothers flanked him, their presence a wall of unspoken truths. "I need air," Leonard managed, his voice a rasp. "Victoria, I'll be right back." "Leonard," she began, but he was already moving, following the triplets as they signaled a staff member. The crowd parted for them, whispers trailing in their wake. Who were these men, shaking hands with Ferrari's CEO, laughing with Europe's car moguls? Leonard's mind raced. How could they be here, at an invitation-only event, successful enough to stand among the ultra-wealthy? The staff member led them to a secluded VIP lounge, its leather armchairs and dim lighting a stark contrast to the showroom's dazzle. The door closed, muffling the jazz, leaving only the pounding of Leonard's heart. Victoria, sensing something monumental, followed, her heels clicking like a metronome of dread. "Leonard, what is this?" she demanded, her composure fraying. "Who are these people?" The tallest brother stepped forward, his green eyes boring into Leonard's. "I'm Wesley Washington. These are my brothers, Winston and Wyatt. And your husband," he said, turning to Victoria, "is our father." Victoria's gasp sliced the air. "That's absurd. Leonard, tell them." "It's true," Leonard whispered, the confession tearing free after decades of silence. His knees buckled, and he sank into an armchair, the weight of 27 years crashing down. Before I met you, Victoria, at Emory, I had sons. Her face drained of color, her hand clutching her pearls as if they could anchor her. Sons? You said you were single, that you'd never... I thought they were gone, Leonard said, voice breaking. My parents told me they died. I believed them. Wesley's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. We didn't die. You signed us away, separated us, let us be raised by strangers. But we're here now. Winston, the one with the cufflinks, leaned forward, his eyes glinting with restrained anger. We've known who you are for years. We found each other, built something from nothing, and now we're here to claim what's ours. What's ours? Victoria echoed, her voice rising. What are you talking about? Wyatt, the charismatic one, smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. A conversation for starters. Somewhere more private. Tomorrow, we'll call. He handed Leonard a business card, the words Triad Innovations embossed in gold. Leonard stared at it, his fingers trembling. How did you find me? We're good at finding things, Wesley said cryptically, like truths people bury. Victoria stood abruptly, her gown rustling. This is madness. Leonard, we're leaving. Wait, he said, but she was already at the door, her silhouette rigid with shock. The triplets exchanged a glance, a silent communication honed by years of brotherhood, and filed out, leaving Leonard alone in the lounge. The business card burned in his hand, a lifeline to a past he tried to erase. He stumbled back to the showroom, the lights too bright, the laughter too loud. Victoria was nowhere in sight. Across the room, the triplets stood by the Bentley, their green eyes tracking him like hawks. Leonard's world, so carefully constructed, was unraveling. Who were these men? What did they want? Revenge, recognition, or something more? And Aisha, where was she in this storm of secrets? As he stepped into the Atlanta night, the city's skyline glittering coldly, Leonard knew one thing. The ghosts of his past weren't just alive. They were here to haunt him, and they weren't leaving until the truth was laid bare. The VIP lounge of the Atlanta Luxury Auto Expo was a cocoon of opulence, its mahogany-paneled walls and plush leather armchairs a stark contrast to the showroom's frenetic gleam. Leonard Harrington sat rigid, his knuckles white around a crystal tumbler of bourbon he hadn't touched. The air was heavy with the scent of polished wood and betrayal. Across from him, the Washington triplets, Wesley, Winston, and Wyatt, stood like sentinels, their identical green eyes boring into him with an intensity that felt like judgment. Victoria, his wife, hovered near the door, her sapphire gown a splash of color against the muted decor, her face a mask of shock and fury. You can't just waltz in here and make these claims, Victoria snapped, her voice cutting through the silence. Leonard, tell them this is nonsense. Her blue eyes darted to him, pleading for a denial that wouldn't come. Leonard's throat tightened. The truth, buried for 27 years, had clawed its way free in the showroom, and now it demanded reckoning. I can't, he said, voice hoarse. They're my sons, Victoria. Wesley, Winston, Wyatt. Born to Aisha Thompson, before I met you. Victoria's hand flew to her chest, as if to hold her heart in place. Aisha, who is she? And why? How? Did you never tell me? Her words trembled, each syllable a wound. Wesley, the tallest, stepped forward, his presence commanding the room. We're not here to destroy your marriage, Mrs. Harrington, he said, his tone measured but unyielding. But we're done being ghosts. Our father signed us away, told the world we died. We deserve answers. Leonard's gaze dropped to the business card on the table. Triad Innovations, their company. These weren't just his sons. They were titans in their own right, and they'd come prepared. What do you want? He asked, dreading the answer. Winston, with his precise movements and steely gaze, leaned against the bar, his cufflinks glinting under the dim lights. Let's start with who we are, he said. We're the Washington brothers, founders of Triad Innovations. We build AI-driven solutions for the automotive industry. And right now, we're negotiating a 30% stake in Harrington Enterprises' luxury vehicle division. Leonard's breath caught, His own company, the empire he'd built brick by brick, was their target. "You planned this," he said, the realization dawning like a cold dawn. "This isn't a coincidence." "No," Wyatt admitted, his charismatic smile tinged with defiance. "We've known you were our father for years, found each other at MIT and Georgetown, and confirmed we were triplets through DNA. A private investigator traced you and our mother." Isha's name, unspoken, hung in the air like a phantom. Leonard's heart clenched. "Aisha," he whispered, "is she? How is she?" "She's a federal judge," Wesley said, his voice softening slightly. "Strong, brilliant, alone. She thinks we died, just like you told everyone. But we're not here about her. Not yet." Victoria's heels clicked as she paced, her composure unraveling. "This is blackmail," she said, pointing at the triplets. "You're threatening us with, what, exposure? For money?" "Not money," Winston corrected, his tone sharp. "Recognition. We want our father to acknowledge us publicly, as his sons, at a charity gala for adoptees' rights next month." Leonard's mind reeled. The gala, a glittering event for Atlanta's elite, would be a stage for his shame. "And if I refuse?" he asked, though he feared the answer. Wyatt's smile faded, replaced by a cold pragmatism. "The deal with Harrington Enterprises falls through. Your board won't be happy losing a multi-billion-dollar partnership. And Atlanta talks, Mr. Harrington. Those green eyes of ours, they're hard to miss." Victoria's laugh was brittle, almost hysterical. "You think you can waltz into our lives and demand this? Leonard, do something." But Leonard was paralyzed, the weight of his past pressing down. 27 years ago, he'd been 28, in love with Aisha, her laughter a melody he couldn't resist. Their triplets, Wesley, Winston, Wyatt, had been born with her warm, brown skin and his green eyes, a perfect fusion of their love. But his parents, guardians of the Harrington legacy, had called it a scandal. They'd orchestrated the adoptions, separated the boys, and lied about their deaths. Leonard, weak and ambitious, had complied, choosing wealth over family. Now the consequences stood before him, not as infants but as men, demanding their place. "Why now?" Leonard asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "After all these years?" Wesley's gaze softened, but only slightly. "Because we spent our lives wondering why our father didn't want us. We built Triad from nothing, found each other, and found you. We're not children anymore. We want to know who we are and where we come from." Winston added, "You owe us that. Not just answers, but a name. Your name." Victoria stopped pacing, her eyes blazing. "And what about me? Our daughters Eleanor and Beatrice? Do they mean nothing in this ambush?" "They're our sisters," Wyatt said, his voice calm but firm. "We don't want to hurt them, but we won't stay shadows to protect your perfect life." Leonard's hands trembled, the bourbon sloshing in the tumbler. He saw Aisha in their features, the curve of Wyatt's smile, Winston's deliberate gestures, Wesley's quiet strength. They were her sons as much as his, and he'd failed them both. "What happens next?" he asked. Wesley slid another card across the table, this one with a private number. "Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Call us. We'll set a meeting. No reporters, no games. Just you, us, and the truth." Victoria's voice was ice. "Leonard, we're leaving. Now!" She strode to the door, not waiting for him. The triplets exchanged a glance, a silent bond Leonard could never share. "Don't run from this," Wyatt said, his tone almost gentle. "You've been running long enough." They left, their footsteps fading into the muffled jazz beyond the door. Leonard sat alone, the tumbler cold against his palm. The lounge felt smaller, the walls closing in with the weight of his choices. Victoria's shock, the triplets' demands, the threat to his empire. It was all too much. Yet beneath the fear, a flicker of something else stirred. Guilt, yes, but also a longing to know the men his sons had become. He tucked the card into his pocket, its edges sharp against his fingers. The Atlanta night waited outside, but for Leonard, there was no escape. The confrontation was over, but the battle for his soul had just begun. The Buckhead mansion loomed like a fortress under Atlanta's starless sky. its marble columns and manicured lawns a monument to Leonard Harrington's empire. Inside, the grand foyer was silent, the chandelier casting fractured light across polished floors. Leonard stood at the bar in his study, the Triad Innovations business card a searing weight in his pocket. The drive home from the Atlanta Luxury Auto Expo had been a descent into hell, Victoria's silence sharper than any accusation, her sapphire gown now discarded somewhere upstairs. At 55, Leonard had built a life of unassailable wealth, but tonight it felt like ash. He poured 2 glasses of bourbon, the amber liquid catching the glow of a single desk lamp. The triplets' green eyes, his eyes, haunted him, their demand for recognition a noose tightening around his legacy. Victoria's footsteps, deliberate and clipped, broke the stillness. She appeared in the doorway, her silk robe a stark white against her pale skin, her blonde hair pulled back severely. Her blue eyes, usually so composed, burned with a fury that made Leonard's stomach twist. "Start talking, Leonard," she said, her voice low, lethal. "No lies, no half-truths. Who are those men, and why do they call you father?" He gestured to the second glass, but she ignored it, crossing her arms. The air crackled with the weight of 24 years of marriage, now teetering on the edge of collapse. Leonard took a sip, the bourbon burning his throat, and began. "Their names are Wesley, Winston, and Wyatt Washington. They're my sons, born 27 years ago to Aisha Thompson, a woman I loved at Emory University." Victoria's sharp inhale was a blade. "Loved?" she echoed, her voice trembling with betrayal. "You told me you were unattached when we met. You built our life, our daughters, our home, on a lie." "Not a lie," Leonard said, though the words felt hollow. "A secret I thought was buried. Aisha was everything. Brilliant, fierce, a law student who challenged the world. We fell in love, but my parents called her a disgrace, a black woman unfit for the Harrington name." Victoria's laugh was brittle, cutting. "So you had an affair, got her pregnant, and what? Abandoned her? Abandoned them?" Leonard's hands shook, the glass clinking against the bar. "It wasn't that simple. Aisha was pregnant with triplets, Wesley, Winston, and Wyatt. My parents found out and lost their minds. They said the scandal would ruin our family, my future. They sent Aisha to a private facility in Savannah and told me the boys died at birth. I was 28, Victoria, weak, dependent on their money. I believed them, or let myself believe." Her eyes widened, then narrowed. "You're saying your parents orchestrated this, and you just went along with it?" He nodded, shame flooding him. "They arranged closed adoptions, separated the boys to erase any trace. I signed the papers, convinced it was the only way to keep my inheritance, my place in their world. Aisha was told the same lie, that her sons were gone. I never saw her again. 6 months later, I met you." Victoria sank into a leather armchair, her robe pooling around her like spilled moonlight. 24 years, she whispered. "We built a family. Eleanor, Beatrice, this house, your empire. And you never thought to tell me you had sons? That you loved another woman?" "I tried to forget," Leonard said, his voice cracking. "I told myself it was the past, that it didn't matter. I loved you, Victoria. I still do. But those boys, they're alive, successful, and they know everything. They're not going away." She stood abruptly, pacing, her bare feet silent on the Persian rug. "They're blackmailing you, Leonard. They want your company, your name, our life. And what about our daughters? Do Eleanor and Beatrice mean nothing in this nightmare?" "They're my daughters," he said fiercely. "I'd do anything for them. But Wesley, Winston, Wyatt, they're my sons too. I can't undo what I did, but I can't ignore them now." Victoria stopped, her face a mask of anguish. "What do they want from you? Money? Power?" "Recognition," Leonard said, the word heavy. "They want me to acknowledge them publicly at a charity gala next month, as their father. If I don't, they'll pull their company's investment from Harrington Enterprises, a 30% stake in our luxury vehicle division. The board would crucify me." Her eyes flashed. "So they're holding your empire hostage, and you're considering it? Throwing our family into chaos for strangers?" "They're not strangers," he said, louder than intended. They're my blood, Victoria. I saw Aisha in them. Her strength, her fire. I failed them once. I don't know if I can do it again. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint tick of a grandfather clock. Victoria's gaze turned icy, her voice a whisper. You failed me, Leonard. All these years I thought I knew you. Now I'm not sure who you are. She grabbed her purse from the console, her movements jerky. I'm going to the office. I need to think, away from you. Her robe swished as she turned, pausing at the door. Fix this, Leonard, or you'll lose more than your company. The front door slammed, the sound echoing through the cavernous house. Leonard sank into the armchair she'd vacated, the bourbon glass cold against his palm. The study, once a sanctuary of leather-bound books and polished oak, felt like a tomb. Victoria's words stung, but the triplets' faces, Wesley's resolve, Winston's precision, Wyatt's charisma, burned brighter. He'd built a perfect life on a foundation of lies, and now the cracks were spreading. He pulled the business card from his pocket, its edges worn from his restless fingers. The private number stared back, a lifeline or a trap. Aisha's name pulsed in his mind, a ghost he'd never outrun. Could he face her again? Could he face the men his sons had become? The Atlanta skyline glittered beyond the window, indifferent to his unraveling world. Leonard didn't know what came next, but one truth was inescapable. His past had returned, and it demanded a reckoning. The Midtown penthouse gleamed like a jewel against Atlanta's twilight skyline, its floor-to-ceiling windows framing a city that never slept. Leonard Harrington stepped off the private elevator, his tailored coat heavy with the weight of 27 years of regret. At 55, the billionaire's silver hair and green eyes marked him as a man of power, but tonight he felt like a penitent approaching an altar. The Washington triplets, Wesley, Winston, and Wyatt, had summoned him here, but it was the promise of seeing Aisha Thompson again that made his heart pound like a drum in a storm. The penthouse door slid open, revealing a sleek expanse of oak floors and modern art, the air scented with cedar and resolve. The triplets stood in the living area, their casual attire, Wesley in a navy sweater, Winston in a crisp button-down, Wyatt in a charcoal tee, softening their formidable presence. Their green eyes, mirrors of Leonard's, held a wary hope. But it was the woman beside them who stopped Leonard's breath. Aisha Thompson, 54, stood tall in a tailored blazer, her dark skin radiant, her eyes a deep, searching brown that had haunted his dreams since Emory. Time had etched fine lines around her mouth, but her grace was a force, unbroken by the years. Leonard, Aisha said, her voice a velvet blade, steady yet laced with pain. It's been a long time. Her words carried the weight of their lost love, the triplets they'd birthed, and the lie that had torn them apart. Leonard's throat tightened, his carefully rehearsed words dissolving. Aisha, he managed, his voice cracking. I didn't know you'd be here. I asked, but I didn't dare hope. He glanced at the triplets, seeking permission to approach. Wesley nodded, his expression unreadable, while Winston and Wyatt watched, their silence a test. The room was a stage, the city's lights a silent audience. Leonard stepped closer, his hands trembling. I'm sorry, he said, the words raw, inadequate. For everything. For not fighting for you. For our sons. My parents called you a scandal, said our boys would ruin me. I was weak, Aisha. I let them lie. That our babies died, that you were gone. I signed them away, and I've hated myself every day since. Aisha's eyes glistened, but her composure held, a judge's discipline forged through decades of loss. They told me the same lie, she said, her voice low, that my sons were stillborn. I mourned them, Leonard, built a life on that grief. I became a federal judge, but the hole never closed, until they found me. She glanced at the triplets, her pride a quiet fire. Wesley spoke, his voice steady but heavy. We told Mom you wanted to meet. She deserved to hear your apology face to face. Leonard nodded, his gaze returning to Aisha. I loved you, he confessed, the truth a wound reopened. Your laugh, your fire, the way you challenged me in class. I dreamed of a life with you, our boys. But my parents controlled my trust fund, my future. They sent you to that facility in Savannah. Cut you off. I was too cowardly to defy them. Aisha's lips pressed into a thin line, her hand gripping the back of a leather chair. You could have found me, she said, not accusing, but searching. After. You had the means, the power. I was ashamed, Leonard admitted, his voice barely audible. I thought you'd hate me, that you'd moved on. I buried it, married Victoria, and raised daughters. But you were always there, Aisha, in every quiet moment. He turned to the triplets. And you, Wesley, Winston, Wyatt, I see your mother in you, your strength, your brilliance. I failed you, but I want to know you now, if you'll let me. Winston, his analytical gaze softening, sat on the arm of a sofa. We found each other by chance, he said. MIT, Georgetown, a DNA test. We built triad innovations from nothing, but we always wondered why our father didn't want us. Wyatt, his charisma tempered by vulnerability, added, We're not here for revenge. We want a connection, a name. That's why we asked you to co-host the gala, to acknowledge us. Leonard's heart clenched. I'll do it, he said, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. Not because of your ultimatum, but because it's right. I owe you that, and more. Wesley's eyes narrowed, assessing. The ultimatum was a test, he revealed, his tone even. We needed to know you'd choose us freely, not because we forced you. Aisha stepped forward, her presence a bridge between past and present. They're extraordinary men, Leonard, she said, her voice softening. They've built a life despite us. Be the father they deserve now. Her hand brushed his arm, a fleeting touch that sent a jolt through him, a ghost of their Emory nights. The city's lights twinkled beyond the windows, indifferent to the mending of broken bonds. Leonard looked at his sons, their faces a tapestry of Aisha's resilience and his regret. Tell me about your lives, he said, settling into a chair, his voice earnest. Not the headlines, the real stories. For the next hour they spoke. Wesley shared his Chicago childhood, raised by a single mother who worked double shifts. Winston described his Boston upbringing with professors who fueled his curiosity. Wyatt recounted Philadelphia, his family's vibrant community, shaping his charm. Leonard listened, his heart swelling with pride and sorrow, glimpsing the men they'd become without him. As Aisha rose to leave, Leonard stood, his eyes locked on hers. Can we talk again? He asked, his voice a plea. She nodded, a faint smile breaking through her reserve. We will, she said, and the promise was a lifeline. The triplets walked Leonard to the elevator, their silence warm, tentative. Thank you, he said, his voice thick, for giving me this chance. As the doors closed, Atlanta's skyline stretched before him, a canvas of possibilities. He didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time he felt ready to face it. The Atlanta Botanical Gardens shimmered under a velvet night sky, its glass-domed conservatory aglow with the soft radiance of 1,000 fairy lights. The charity gala for adoptees' rights was a spectacle of wealth and virtue. Atlanta's elites swirling in tuxedos, in sequined gowns, their laughter mingling with the clink of crystal flutes. Leonard Harrington stood at the edge of the dance floor, his silver hair catching the light, his tailored suit masking the tremor in his hands. At 55, he was a billionaire on the precipice of ruin, not of wealth, but of family. Tonight, he would unveil his truth, and the cost was already etching lines into his face. Victoria lingered nearby, a vision in emerald silk, her smile as polished as the diamonds at her throat. But her blue eyes were distant, her warmth a facade since Leonard's confession. Their daughters, Eleanor and Beatrice, stood stiffly beside her, summoned from Yale and Princeton under the guise of a family emergency. Eleanor, 24, radiated her mother's icy poise, her blonde hair swept into an elegant chignon. Beatrice, 21, was quieter, her dark eyes darting nervously, sensing the storm beneath the gala's glitter. Leonard had insisted they hear the truth here. Now, with the Washington triplets, Wesley, Winston, and Wyatt present. The weight of that decision pressed against his chest like a stone. The triplets stood near a cascading orchid display, their bespoke suits sharp against the lush greenery. Wesley, the tallest, exuded quiet authority. Winston's precise gestures betrayed his analytical mind. Wyatt's charismatic smile drew admiring glances. Their green eyes, Leonard's eyes, scanned the room, unyielding in their purpose. They weren't just guests. They were co-hosts, their company, Triad Innovations, a silent partner in this night's philanthropy. Leonard's stomach churned. He'd agreed to acknowledge them publicly, not for their ultimatum, but for the chance to right a 27-year wrong. But would his family survive the fallout? "Mr. Harrington," a staff member murmured, "the private suite is ready." Leonard nodded, leading Victoria, Eleanor, and Beatrice to a secluded room off the conservatory, its walls draped in ivory silk, its air thick with tension. The triplets followed, their footsteps a steady drumbeat. As the door closed, muffling the gala's music, Leonard felt the world shrink to this moment. "Dad, what's going on?" Eleanor demanded, her voice sharp, her arms crossed. "You dragged us here from school for what? A charity event?" Leonard's throat tightened. "It's not about the gala," he said, his voice low but steady. "It's about our family. There's something you need to know. About me, about my past." He gestured to the triplets, who stood united, their expressions unreadable. "These men, Wesley, Winston, and Wyatt Washington, are my sons, your half-brothers." Beatrice's gasp was soft, her hand flying to her mouth. Eleanor's face hardened, her eyes narrowing to slits. "Your sons?" she spat, her poise cracking. "That's impossible. You and Mom have been married forever. You're saying you cheated?" "No," Leonard said quickly, his hands raised. "This was before your mother, when I was at Emory. I loved a woman named Aisha Thompson. She gave birth to triplets, and my parents forced me to give them up. I thought they died, but they were adopted, separated. I didn't know until they found me." Victoria's silence was deafening, her gaze fixed on the floor, her emerald gown a stark contrast to her pallor. Eleanor turned to her. "Mom, you knew about this? And you let him bring us here to, what, humiliate us?" "I found out recently," Victoria said, her voice brittle, each word clipped. "Your father kept this from all of us." Beatrice, her dark eyes wide, stared at the triplets. "Half-brothers? But they don't even look like us." Her voice wavered, tinged with confusion and fear. Wesley stepped forward, his tone calm but firm. "We're not here to disrupt your lives. We're your brothers, whether you accept it or not. We just want our place acknowledged." "Acknowledged?" Eleanor laughed, a harsh, cutting sound. "You think you can waltz into our family, our legacy, and claim a stake? You're outsiders. You don't belong in the Harrington world." Winston's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "We've built our own world, Eleanor. Triad Innovations isn't pocket change. We're not after your inheritance. We want our father's name." Beatrice's voice was small, almost lost. "Dad, how could you keep this from us? From Mom?" Leonard's heart fractured. "I was ashamed," he admitted, his voice raw. "I was young, weak, controlled by my parents' prejudice. I thought I was protecting you by burying it. But I was wrong." Victoria finally spoke, her words ice cold. "You're protecting them now, Leonard. At what cost to us?" She gestured to Eleanor and Beatrice, her diamonds flashing with the movement. "Our daughters deserve better than this public spectacle." "It's not a spectacle," Wyatt said, his charismatic edge sharpening. "It's the truth. And it's not just about us. It's about every adoptee who's been erased. That's why we're here, co-hosting this gala." Eleanor's eyes blazed. "You're using this event to shame us, to parade your existence. You're not Harringtons. You'll never be." The triplets exchanged a glance, a silent bond Leonard envied. Wesley's voice was steel. "We don't need your approval, Eleanor, but we're not going anywhere." Leonard's head throbbed, a dull ache he dismissed as stress. He felt unsteady, the room tilting slightly, but he pushed it aside. "Enough," he said, his voice cutting through the tension. "This isn't about sides. You're all my children. I've failed you. Eleanor, Beatrice, Wesley, Winston, Wyatt. But I'm trying to make it right." Beatrice's eyes filled with tears. "You should have told us sooner," she whispered, turning away. Eleanor grabbed her sister's arm, her face a mask of fury. "We're done here, Dad. You want to play father to them? Do it without us." She stormed out, Beatrice trailing, her sobs echoing. Victoria lingered, her gaze unreadable. "You've made your choice, Leonard," she said softly, her voice laced with something darker. Resignation, perhaps, or calculation. She followed the girls, her silhouette vanishing into the gala's glow. Leonard sank into a chair, the silk walls closing in. The triplets stood quietly, their green eyes reflecting a mix of resolve and sorrow. "I'm sorry," Leonard said, his voice breaking. "I didn't expect. I thought they'd understand." "They're protecting their world," Winston said, not unkindly. "We've had years to process this. They've had minutes." The gala's music filtered through the door, a cruel reminder of the celebration beyond. Leonard's chest tightened, his breath shallow. Was it guilt or something else? He couldn't tell. The night was far from over, but his family was fracturing, and he didn't know how to hold the pieces together. The Buckhead mansion stood silent, its marble halls bathed in the gray light of a late June dawn. Leonard Harrington, once the unyielding titan of Atlanta's elite, lay crumpled on the study floor, the crystal tumbler of bourbon shattered beside him. His silver hair clung to his sweat-slicked forehead, his breath shallow and ragged. At 55, he'd dismissed the dizziness, the fatigue, the nagging ache in his bones as stress from the unraveling of his life. But now, as the room spun and darkness clawed at his vision, he knew it was something far worse. His fingers fumbled for his phone, the screen blurring as he dialed Victoria. She arrived minutes later, her silk robe hastily tied, her blonde hair a tangled halo. "Leonard!" she gasped, kneeling beside him, her blue eyes wide with what seemed like panic. "What happened?" But her hands hesitated, lingering just short of touching him, and in his haze Leonard caught a flicker in her gaze. Cold, calculating, like a predator sizing up its prey. "Call ambulance!" he rasped, pain searing his chest. Victoria nodded, her movements jerky as she dialed 911, her voice trembling with rehearsed urgency. The paramedics arrived in a blur of sirens, their boots thundering across the polished floors. Leonard's world faded to fragments. The stretcher's cold metal, the wail of the ambulance, the sterile white of Emory Hospital's ICU. He awoke to the rhythmic beep of monitors, an IV line snaking from his arm. The room was stark, its fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows. Victoria sat by his bedside, her emerald scarf a splash of color against her pale face, her expression a careful mask of concern. But Leonard's eyes were drawn to the three figures at the foot of his bed. Wesley, Winston, and Wyatt Washington, his triplet sons. Their bespoke suits were gone, replaced by casual shirts, but their green eyes, his eyes, burned with a quiet intensity that anchored him. "Dad," Wesley said, his voice steady but laced with worry, "you're stable, but it was close. The doctors are running tests." Leonard's throat was dry, his words a croak. "What happened?" Winston, his analytical gaze sharp, stepped closer, a tablet in hand. "You collapsed. They found something in your blood work. Traces of arsenic. It's not accidental, Leonard. Someone's been poisoning you." The word poison hit like a thunderbolt. Leonard's mind reeled, fragments of the past weeks flashing. The bitter taste in his coffee, the unexplained nausea, Victoria's insistence on preparing his meals. He turned to her, searching her face. "Victoria?" Her eyes widened, her hand fluttering to her chest. "Me? Leonard, how could you think? I've been by your side, terrified for you." Her voice cracked, but her fingers twisted the scarf too tightly, betraying her. Wyatt, his charismatic edge now a blade, leaned in. "We didn't want to believe it either. But we've been watching, Dad. You've been sick since the expo, worse after the gala. So we dug deeper." Winston swiped his tablet, pulling up a series of encrypted emails. "I hacked into Victoria's private server," he said, unapologetic. "She's been corresponding with a chemist in Savannah. Small, regular payments for supplements, receipts for arsenic compounds disguised as health tonics, date back 6 months." Leonard's heart pounded, each beat a hammer against his ribs. "Why?" he whispered, his gaze locked on Victoria. "We've been married 24 years. Our daughters—" Victoria's facade crumbled, her lips trembling. "You don't understand," she hissed, her voice low, venomous. "You betrayed us, Leonard. Those boys, you're bastards. They threatened everything. Eleanor and Beatrice deserve your empire, not them. I did what I had to. Wesley's voice was steel. You poisoned him to secure the inheritance. You and your daughters plan to let him die, then claim Harrington Enterprises. Daughters? Leonard's voice broke, the betrayal slicing deeper. Eleanor and Beatrice, they knew? Winston nodded grimly, scrolling to another email. They were complicit. Eleanor forwarded your medical reports to Victoria, tracking your symptoms. Beatrice arranged the chemist's payments through a shell company. They thought they'd outlast you. Victoria stood, her scarf slipping to the floor. You can't prove this, she spat, her poise shattered. You're nothing but scavengers, trying to steal what's ours. Wyatt's smile was cold. We've already sent the evidence to the police. Bank records, emails, chemical traces, they're on their way. As if on cue, the door swung open, and two officers entered, their badges glinting under the fluorescence. Victoria Harrington, one said, you're under arrest for attempted murder and conspiracy. Her scream was sharp, her wrists twisting as the cuffs clicked shut. She cast a final venomous glance at Leonard, her eyes promising retribution, before they led her away. Leonard's vision blurred, not from poison but from tears. His daughters, Eleanor, poised and ruthless. Beatrice, quiet but complicit, had betrayed him alongside their mother. The family he'd built, the legacy he'd cherished, was a house of lies. He looked at the triplets, their faces a mix of sorrow and resolve. You saved me, he whispered. Wesley squeezed his hand, his grip firm. We're your sons, Dad. We couldn't let her win. Winston's voice softened. We've hired a legal team, led by someone you'll meet soon. She's building the case against Victoria and your daughters. They won't touch your empire. Wyatt leaned against the bed, his charisma muted by concern. Focus on getting better. We're here every day until you're out of this bed. Leonard's chest ached, not from poison but from the weight of his fractured life. The monitors beeped steadily, a reminder that he'd survived. For now. But the cost was staggering. A wife unmasked as a would-be killer. Daughters who'd traded his life for wealth. Yet in the triplets' steady presence, he glimpsed something new. A family forged not by deceit but by truth. The hospital window framed Atlanta's skyline, its lights flickering like distant stars. Leonard didn't know how long he had, but he knew one thing. The Washington brothers were his redemption, and he'd fight to deserve them, whatever came next. The Emory Hospital room was a sterile sanctuary, its pale walls softened by the golden glow of a June sunset filtering through the window. Leonard Harrington lay propped against pillows, his once commanding frame diminished, his silver hair stark against the pallor of his skin. At 55, the billionaire's empire was a distant echo, drowned out by the steady beep of monitors and the rasp of his labored breaths. The arsenic poisoning had ravaged his organs, leaving him a fragile shell of the titan he'd been. Yet his green eyes, though dimmed, held a fierce clarity, a man racing against time to rewrite his legacy. By his bedside stood the Washington triplets, Wesley, Winston, and Wyatt, their faces etched with quiet sorrow. Wesley, the tallest, gripped Leonard's hand, his strength a silent anchor. Winston, ever analytical, adjusted his glasses, a legal pad filled with notes on the table beside him. Wyatt, his charisma subdued, leaned against the wall, his green eyes mirroring Leonard's, a bond beyond words. A fourth figure sat near the window, her presence a quiet storm. Aisha Thompson, the love Leonard had lost 27 years ago, now a federal judge, her dark eyes glistening with unshed tears. Leonard, Aisha said, her voice steady but heavy, you don't have to do this now. Rest. We're here. He shook his head, the effort costing him a wince. No time, he rasped, his voice a ghost of its former resonance. I've run from the truth too long. I need to make this right. For you, for them. He glanced at the triplets, his sons, whose existence he'd denied until fate forced his hand. The hospital bed creaked as Leonard shifted, his gaze settling on a leather-bound folder Winston held. Inside was a new will, drafted under Aisha's legal guidance, a document that would shatter the life he'd built with Victoria and their daughters, Eleanor and Beatrice. The betrayal of their poisoning scheme still burned, a wound deeper than the poison itself. Leonard's empire, Harrington Enterprises, was worth billions, but its true value lay in what it could become in the hands of those he'd wronged. "I was a coward," Leonard began, his words slow, deliberate. "Aisha, I loved you, but I let my parents tear us apart. They called our sons a scandal, forced me to sign them away. I believed they died, or wanted to believe it, to save my inheritance." His voice cracked, tears tracing the lines of his face. "I failed you, and I failed Wesley, Winston, Wyatt." Isha leaned forward, her hand resting lightly on his arm, a gesture of forgiveness he didn't deserve. "You were young, Leonard. So was I. We were both victims of their prejudice. But these men," she nodded to the triplets, "they're proof we created something extraordinary." Wesley's grip tightened, his voice thick. "Dad, you don't have to." "I do," Leonard cut in, his eyes fierce. "You found each other, built triad innovations, and became men I'm proud of. You saved me from Victoria's poison. I won't let my legacy be a lie." He gestured to Winston. "Read it." Winston opened the folder, his voice steady as he summarized the will. "Harrington Enterprises, its assets, and all personal holdings are bequeathed to Aisha Thompson and her sons, Wesley, Winston, and Wyatt Washington, in equal shares. Victoria Harrington, Eleanor, and Beatrice are disinherited, their actions constituting attempted murder." Leonard's chest heaved, the effort of speaking draining him. "Aisha, you'll guide them. You're the strongest person I know. Boys, take the company. Make it yours. Something honest, something good." Wyatt stepped closer, his usual charm replaced by raw emotion. "We don't need the money, Dad. We wanted you." Leonard's smile was faint, pained. "I know, but this is all I have left to give. Build what I couldn't, a family, a future." He looked at Aisha, his eyes softening. "I never stopped loving you. Every day I wondered where you were, what you became. I'm sorry I wasn't stronger." Her tears fell now, silent as she squeezed his hand. "You're strong now, Leonard. This is enough." The room grew quiet, the monitor's beeps a solemn rhythm. Leonard's breathing slowed, each inhale a struggle. He turned to the triplets, memorizing their faces. Wesley's resolve, Winston's precision, Wyatt's warmth. They were his redemption, proof that love could endure even the darkest betrayals. "Promise me," he whispered, "you'll take care of each other. And Aisha." "We promise," Wesley said, his voice breaking, speaking for all three. The sunset deepened, casting a warm glow over the room, as if the world itself paused to witness Leonard's final act. Aisha began to recite a poem they'd loved at Emory, her voice a soothing melody, carrying him back to stolen nights under starlit oaks. The triplets joined, their voices soft, a chorus of forgiveness and farewell. Leonard's eyes fluttered closed, a faint smile lingering. His hand went slack in Wesley's grip, the monitors flatlining into a piercing wail. Aisha's poem faltered, her sob mingling with the triplets' quiet gasps. Nurses rushed in, but there was no saving him. The poison's damage was too deep, his heart too heavy with regret. The triplets stood frozen, their green eyes reflecting the fading light. Aisha rose, her composure fracturing, and embraced them, her sons, their grief a shared tapestry. Leonard was gone, but his will was a beacon, a chance to forge a legacy untainted by lies. Outside, Atlanta's skyline twinkled, indifferent to the man who'd once shaped it. In the hospital room, a family was born anew, bound not by wealth but by truth. Leonard's empire awaited, but for now they held each other, mourning the father they'd only just begun to know. The Atlanta skyline gleamed under a June midday sun, its glass towers reflecting a city pulsing with ambition. At the heart of downtown stood the newly rechristened Harrington Thompson Tower, a 60-story monolith of steel and glass, its facade etched with subtle tributes to a legacy reborn. Inside, on the penthouse floor, the Washington triplets, Wesley, Winston, and Wyatt, stood before a panoramic window, their bespoke suits sharp, their green eyes alight with purpose. A year had passed since their father, Leonard Harrington, drew his final breath, leaving them his billion-dollar empire. Today they unveiled not just a company, but a vision, a new era forged from the ashes of betrayal. The conference room buzzed with anticipation, its sleek table surrounded by global investors, tech moguls, and Atlanta's elite. Aisha Thompson, their mother, sat at the head, her federal judge's gravitas softened by a proud smile. At 54, her dark eyes sparkled with the fire that had once captivated Leonard, now channeled into guiding her sons. The triplets, once erased from history, were now titans. Their company, Triad Innovations, seamlessly merged with Harrington Enterprises. The rebranding ceremony was more than a corporate milestone. It was a declaration of identity, a triumph over the lies that had separated them. Wesley, the tallest, stepped to the podium, his voice resonant, commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the launch of Harrington Thompson Enterprises," he began, his green eyes sweeping the room. "We stand here not just as businessmen, but as a family honoring two legacies, Leonard Harrington, who gave us his empire, and Aisha Thompson, who gave us our strength." The crowd murmured, captivated by the triplets' unity, their story a whispered legend in Atlanta circles. Winston, his analytical mind evident in his precise gestures, joined his brother, a tablet glowing with data. "Our vision is bold," he said, his voice crisp. "We've transformed Harrington Enterprises into a global leader in sustainable AI-driven automotive solutions. Our new electric hypercar line, powered by Triad's proprietary tech, cuts carbon emissions by 70% without sacrificing luxury." A screen behind him flared to life, showcasing a sleek, obsidian vehicle, the Aisha One, its curves a tribute to their mother's elegance. Applause rippled through the room, investors nodding in approval. Wyatt, his charisma a magnetic force, took the stage, his smile warm but fierce. "This isn't just about cars," he said, his voice carrying the cadence of a storyteller. "It's about impact. Today we launched the Aisha Thompson Foundation, funding education for marginalized youth, kids like us who were told they didn't belong." He gestured to Aisha, who rose, her navy suit impeccable, her presence a quiet yet powerful force. "Our mother taught us resilience. This foundation is her legacy, and ours." Aisha approached the podium, her voice steady, resonant. "27 years ago, I lost my sons. Told they died," she said, her words piercing the room's hum. "But they found me, found each other, and built something extraordinary. This foundation will ensure no child is erased, no dream denied." Tears glistened in her eyes, mirrored in the audience, as cameras flashed, capturing a moment of raw triumph. The triplets stood beside her, their green eyes, Leonard's eyes, reflecting a shared vow to honor their parents' love, not their pain. The ceremony transitioned to a rooftop reception with the Atlanta skyline serving as a dazzling backdrop. Guests mingled over champagne, the air alive with jazz and the clink of glasses. Wesley navigated the crowd, shaking hands with investors, his quiet authority sealing deals worth millions. Winston, tablet in hand, fielded questions from tech journalists, his data-driven passion infectious. Wyatt charmed philanthropists, his stories of the foundation's first scholarship recipients, teens from Atlanta's underserved neighborhoods, drawing pledges that doubled the fund's endowment. Aisha stood apart, gazing at the city, her son's laughter a melody she'd never dared hope to hear. She'd rebuilt her life after losing them, rising to a federal judgeship, but the whole remained until they returned. Now they were her anchor, her purpose. She touched the pendant at her throat, a gift from Leonard in their Emory days, its emerald matching her son's eyes. His death had broken her anew, but his will, naming her and the triplets his heirs, had given her a chance to heal. A young woman approached, a scholarship recipient, her eyes bright with gratitude. "Judge Thompson," she said, "your sons inspired me. I'm studying engineering because of them." Aisha smiled, her heart swelling. "They inspire me too," she said, glancing at the triplets, who were now together, their bond a fortress against the world's chaos. The sun dipped, casting a golden glow over the rooftop. Wesley raised a glass, his voice cutting through the chatter. To Harrington Thompson Enterprises, he said, and to family, found, fought for, and forever. The crowd echoed the toast, glasses glinting like stars. Winston caught Aisha's eye, his nod a silent promise. They'd protect her legacy. Wyatt's grin, infectious, drew laughter, lightening the moment's weight. As the jazz swelled, the triplets stood at the edge of the rooftop, Atlanta sprawling below. They'd faced erasure, betrayal, and loss, but here they stood, unbroken, unstoppable. Harrington Thompson Enterprises was their empire, a fusion of Leonard's wealth and Aisha's wisdom, driven by their relentless drive. The Aisha Thompson Foundation was their heart, a beacon for those society overlooked. The city's lights flickered on, a constellation of possibilities. Wesley's hand rested on Winston's shoulder, Wyatt's on Wesley's, a chain forged in resilience. Isha joined them, her presence a quiet strength. Your father would be proud, she said, her voice soft. You've built what he dreamed. We're just starting, Wyatt replied, his green eyes gleaming. The future was theirs, a canvas of hope painted over scars. Atlanta watched, and the world would follow. What a journey through secrets, betrayal, and redemption. What did you think of the Washington Triplets' rise and Leonard's final act? Share your thoughts in the comments. Where are you listening from? Your feedback fuels our stories. Thank you for joining us in this epic tale. Don't miss our next gripping saga. Subscribe now and hit that bell to stay tuned. Let's keep the conversation going. Drop a comment, share your city, and we'll see you in the next story. Until then, take care.